everybody. This is Heidi St Johns. Thanks for tuning in today. You guys have found me at my little corner of the internet. I'm so glad that you're here. Today is Thursday, August the 26th. And as promised, I've got a couple of guests in the studio today, and we're going to talk about what is happening in this country from the perspective of an immigrant. Stick around. I think you're going to be encouraged. So lots of things going on this week. You guys know that you can find my schedule at HeidiStJohns.com. And if you've got questions about my run for Congress, again, that is HeidiStJohnsForCongress.com. I wanted to thank you guys for coming out to the event that we had in Philida Park on Wednesday. It is really good to see you guys getting off the bench and onto the battlefield. It's part of the reason that I am running for office in the first place, really is to set an example, to say, listen, if that homeschool mom, that mother of 7, that grandmother, if she can put herself out there, surely I can put myself out there, because our nation is in trouble. And a couple of days ago, we talked about communism and Marxism being a philosophy, an idea that really is a dangerous idea, that when it takes root, it ultimately results in communism. And a couple of years ago, I was very, very honored and pleased to be invited to start speaking and do a few events with an organization called Slavic Vote. And when they approached me, I just thought, yes, this is amazing, because there's so many people here from the Slavic community. And I still believe if they will be engaged and get involved in what's happening politically, especially, we will see the tide turn in the Pacific Northwest and even around the country. So Dmitry approached me and asked me if I'd be willing to speak. And
they need your silence. They need you to be quiet. One of the reasons why I'm so excited about the Slavic community and what God is doing in your midst is because I've been told how many of you live here. And I know that upwards of 90% of y'all are not voting. And I wonder what would happen if there was a move of God so powerful in the Slavic community, you could change the culture in the Pacific Northwest for the Lord.
So guys, welcome to the Heidi St Johns podcast. I'm pretty sure this is the first time you've been on here, yeah?
That's the first time.
Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, my wife was actually at this center a few days ago, and she's like, wow, I didn't even know this place existed. She was living right next door to you guys.
Did she like it?
Yeah, she loved it. She was a little overwhelmed, and then when she brought the information to me, I was overwhelmed. I'm like, wow, people are actually doing things, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, it's really great. And you guys, I'm going to start with you, because you've done something that you didn't think you would ever do, and that was to pull your kids out of public school.
Yes, I did.
How terrifying was that?
My wife did, actually. She came and notified me, and I was like, okay, well, we took the jump. I guess we got to do this.
Yeah.
And I think it's just going to be an interesting, I don't think it's going to be worse than what happened last year, because we're actually pulling our kids out of K-12, which is a very big program across the U.S. A lot of parents decided to move their kids that direction because it was the only option. It was free. But our kids were just sitting at the computer for 8 hours a day.
Awful.
And it was not good.
No, there's no life in that. No. And they're still putting their propaganda out online, and so you can't really get away from it.
Yeah,
so.
Especially this year. I actually went to a school board meeting for the first time.
No kid, look at you guys getting off
right
the
when
bench.
the K-12 stuff started, and I was like, whoa. I was very surprised.
It wasn't what you expected?
No, a lot of the teachers were embarrassed to actually do the presentation.
They should be embarrassed.
What kind
it's
of stuff.
Embarrassing.
Yeah, especially to like little kids, and I can just imagine the questions that they would ask, and it was just not something that I'd want my kids to go through, to tell you the truth.
Well, I'm excited for you, because this homeschool journey, I know I told you guys the other day when I was on your show, this is going to be the best thing you ever do for your family. So tell your wife her very worst day at homeschool is going to be better than her kid's best day in the public indoctrination center known as the public school.
Amen.
So congratulations to you. Dmitry, tell me about Slavic Vote, because are you the founder of Slavic Vote?
Well, there's multiple. I call all of us founders, because we all kind of jumped into this, and we started doing this, and it changed our lives, I think, in many ways. I know for sure for me, it's a different lifestyle altogether, and I love it.
Yeah. And how many of you are there now?
So we have about, I believe, 7 board members. We started off with 8, 9 members. A few had to step away and do other things, but we're still strong with 7 board members. And we started off with primarily going to churches. Our church was kind of our goal originally, just go to our church, register people to vote, encourage them to just get involved and at least vote. And it just kind of went from there, where we were going all across Oregon and Washington to different states and doing registration drives. And just recently we kind of kicked off California as well, where it's slowly kind of picking up, but a lot of things are happening there too. And hopefully, in a year or so, we'll have a full team there as well, and it'll be great. There's a lot of Slavic people there.
That's awesome. And the two of you work together, correct?
In the Slavic,
Yeah, we actually went to the same church.
Yeah.
That's where it kind of started. But
Which church is this?
It was New Life on the Oregon side. But the thing is, I remember our first meeting. It was so interesting because I've never seen these people, and we just invited a whole group of people, and we just sat around this table, kind of shaped like a rectangle, and that's where we met people like Lily Zhukova.
Yeah, she's a firecracker.
And we met so many amazing people, and this is just right after the whole hype of what happened in Olympia that year, and this is kind of when the Russian community just woke up, and we didn't do it. It wasn't, the work of our hands, because previously I think people tried to get into politics in the Russian community, and it just went really bad. A lot of the pastors were not very forthcoming with even helping out or even sitting down to listen, just really staying away from politics. And I think we'll get later in the show, we'll probably go and describe why they have that approach and why that happened. But yeah, the group came together. It was amazing. And I think we still have an amazing group of board members. A lot of people actually grew, like Lily. She's no longer with us, but she brought so much to the table with her experience, because she worked in politics. She was in Olympia for a while, and then her law background that she's doing right now is just it brought a lot of comfort to the pastors when we brought her along, and we kind of learned quite a bit over the years. It
was a very God kind of experience, because we kind of were talking with a few people, with our few friends, we should probably start this again, very small. Our thinking was very small, just one church, two churches. And as we were meeting and talking about it, there was this storm brewing in Olympia, where we saw just all of a sudden, we see this huge rallies that are being formed, and Slavic people are just going like crazy. And I remember April 1st, that was a really big rally on the Fool's Day, right?
April Fool's Day.
April Fool's Day. And I remember clearly we went, that was our kickoff, where we went and started talking to people and asking, hey, you want to get involved? So let me get your number. We'll stay in touch. And even now, some of the people that we talked, we stay in touch with them. And it was a very, it was just a beautiful day.
Well, and it's encouraging, because you guys are really the tip of the spear in this area for the Slavic community to really get them involved, because we need their help. There's just no question. And we're in trouble. The nation's in trouble right now. We're watching this incredible unraveling of our freedoms and our rights that we have long enjoyed in the United States. And really, people like me who've grown up here and never knew that there was another way to do it. I went to a Christian school, and we were taught actually in high school. It was a wonderful history teacher that taught Western civilization, and boy, I'll tell you what, he hammered communism and socialism and Marxism, and we studied these guys, and we knew that was a dangerous ideology. The kids who are coming out of our schools now have no frame of reference for this. They don't understand communism. They do not understand the history of this nation, or why communism is even bad. But you guys have a very unique perspective, because you can look back in the not so distant past in your own families and hear actual stories of people that escaped communism, and then some of them didn't. I had a Russian woman in the studio with me about a year ago, and she told a bone-chilling story.
She's a good friend of ours.
Yeah, about what happened in her family. And so what I would love to do is just talk to you guys about where you've come from, and because we were talking the other day, there are some striking parallels to what happened as you saw your freedoms. Because people think, oh, Russia has always been communist. No, it hasn't always been communist.
70 years, that's it.
Yeah, and it's very, very sad. Even Iran, if you look at the history of some of these countries, if you look back to Iran in the 50s and the 60s, the women there weren't being beaten in the public square. They were going to university. Well, when the Ayatollahs took over and they came in and they brought in their dictatorship and their theocracy, the women really had to go underground. And what we're going to see happen in Afghanistan now will be the same thing. This is going to be devastating for women and girls, because these are ideologies that actually kill people. So I'd like to start with you, Dmitry, and maybe tell us a little bit about your family and how long you guys have been here.
Yeah, and I think even thinking back here in the United States, I don't remember really even, in our schools learning about Soviet Union and just the communism and everything. They didn't teach that. And I think what helped our community is that when we were growing up, in churches, in homes, that's something that was always talked about. Our parents always talked about it, our grandparents. And I think we grew up learning and hearing about these stories and without even, learning these at school. So I think that's
You're talking about school in the United States.
Correct.
Yeah, they don't teach it.
And the only way we learned about it is through our family stories. And that's something that we heard again in churches. People always talked about it. And I think that kind of left a very, that kind of left a very interesting kind of picture for us. And just about 5 years ago, personally, I started seeing some things that are very similar. And that's why it made me want to get involved, and why I thought, if we don't do anything about it, it's going to come back and it's going to get worse. So personally for me, my parents, we moved here when I was about 9 years old. We moved here from Belarus, and my parents grew up there, and we also grew up in Russia in the little town called Novokubansk. And my family originally was from Belarus, and during the World War II, the occupation started happening from Belarus, from Poland, and my family, my grandparents had to flee to Russia, and they had to stay there because they were being, my grand-grandfather was imprisoned for 10 years because he was a leader in town, and he became a Christian, and the whole town, essentially became Christian because of him. And because of that, he was imprisoned, he was beaten for many, many years, and he was very, he was almost, they couldn't rely on him anymore as a person who would keep up the family. So my grandmother became, since she was the oldest, she became almost like a father figure, and she took care of all the family, took care of my mom, took care of all of our kids, and it was a very hard life. And when they moved here about 20 years ago, they remembered all those things, and they constantly talked about it. And I remembered those things, and I always wanted to kind of document it. And
it's interesting. I'll stop on something for just a minute, because you were saying that he was imprisoned and beaten because he was a Christian. And I think people need to understand, because I keep hearing people say, well, communism, they're not anti-Christian, they're atheist. You have to remove God from the equation to do what they do, to have total allegiance to the state. And people need to understand that there's a reason why Christians are persecuted in political systems like communism.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What was the effect of that on the Christian community?
Well, it essentially moved them underground. All the churches had to go to homes. If they didn't register, which was also kind of a new thing, essentially if you were a Christian, you were made fun of, you were persecuted, you were imprisoned, and you didn't have a peaceful life. You couldn't peacefully assemble and worship your God. And that was similar in some cases with Muslims and other churches. And some churches I heard, like Catholics or Orthodox, they had some leeway, but for the most part, in the Protestants, they probably got the worst of it from what I hear.
Yeah, a lot of people, I don't think they realize. I think the best example maybe for the U.S. would be like Cuba, because they're so next door to us, and even there, we probably heard a lot of horror stories, and what happened. People are still coming over here to this day. That's kind of like here. Yeah, it's almost like a live version of what happened on a much greater scale, I think, in the Soviet Union. So even prior to coming onto the show, I actually gave myself a huge history lesson. I didn't realize this, but Christianity, or any religion for that matter, is just not compatible with socialism and communism, which is, I think, for me, it's almost the same thing, because it leads to the other.
They all go to the same place.
One of the things is that it's not compatible because the state cannot be the ultimate authority in the end. And that's all it turns, and that's all it is. Because with being a Christian in a communist country, you have a higher moral standard, for example. And what got a lot of Christians in trouble in the former Soviet Union like Dmitry might have mentioned, was the fact that a lot of Christians didn't take up arms. I mean, it might have been an understanding of like what, do not kill in Russian. It's just translated into more of a simpler word, and but that wasn't even the point. The point was the fact that nothing could be above what the state said and told you to do, and you said, oh no, I'm not going to do this because I believe that there's a God or there's somebody else that I believe in. So in totality, we think of like the Holocaust, for example. There's like 6 million, and they include the Jews. I think there was the gays and people that were
helping the Jews too. There were the
So in Russia, communism on the max scale, or if we take the bigger range of the numbers, they say it's around 60 million people perished under communism. Of the 60 million, around 12 of them were Christian or religious related deaths. Because the whole communist system, what they figured out really early was that that the whole system, communism couldn't exist just by paying everybody the same amount, because people wouldn't want to become a doctor if you're getting paid the same as a janitor, for example. It kind of broke down the morality of the people pretty quickly. But I think in the end, what happened is Christians became like a thorn in their side, and they were not compatible with the system. Even though they were great workers, they were honest. They didn't drink, which is a huge issue in the former Soviet Union, probably to this day. But they didn't. They were a great labor force, and the communism just decided that camps, like work camps, like labor camps, which turned into more like a concentration camp situation, was just the way that they wanted to go. So if you ask even like Bill, one of our board members, Bill Krasnogorov, or Red Hill Construction, you might have heard of him. A lot of these people came from Siberia, not because it's such a great place to live in Siberia, because I mean it's beautiful maybe during the summer, but
it's like Alaska. It's beautiful for
for
about
2 months,
6 weeks,
or something like that. Well, if you ask them like, how did you guys end up there? They'll tell you that the mothers, once the breadwinner, like in Dimitri's case, he says his grandfather was sent somewhere, the whole family would move to that location, and it just became a generational thing where if you're in this place, you get sent there for 5 years, you'll probably end up living there for 10 years. And it's just a very sad all around situation for the Slavic community. And you can even talk to like grandpas that are still alive to this day that have like markings on their hands for like being in the specific camp, like tattoos, just like they did in the Holocaust. It just, the horror stories, just open up YouTube, type in Christian or Baptist persecution or Pentecostal persecution, and it'll bring a ton of stories of different things that happen. So me and Dmitry, we're fairly young. I think Dmitry's a little bit younger than I am, but we kind of lived, because I was born in 81, we lived during the communist era where everything was falling apart. So I would say we kind of caught the tail end of the whole situation of how communism fell apart, and things were a little more relaxed, but still that, let's say our year 89 is coming really close to what's happening in the US right now. So we didn't get the beginning of the whole communism, which started like 70 years. We caught the end of it. And even then, we see the same type of things happening that we see starting in the US, which for my generation, we're like, wow, okay. So, for example, something that was kind of common in school is, for example, with vaccinations, right? Or not vaccinations, just with any kind of medical procedure. So you'd be sitting in class, and a gentleman would come into the class, and he'd be like, hey, Borisov, he'd have a red band on his hand, and he would call you out into the hallway, and he's like, let's go. And the thing is, you don't know where you're going.
So this happened to you?
Yeah, well, it happened to me personally, but I mean, it's not a tragic story, but so you know,
That's
and I'm
a
like,
scary story,
yeah,
though.
but the scary part is it doesn't matter what the end result really is. It's how, you know, how they're
How they
able
get
to
that
do
kind of
this.
control,
And
That parents' consent.
yeah, the parents don't know. This is something that just the state does. So they took me.
That's interesting.
Yeah, they took me into some kind of floor areas. It was a long walk. It felt like a death march. And I knew, because my parents told me, you know, people might do stuff. Just be really careful. Be always cautious. And we walked into an area. They plopped me out like on a dentist chair and just started drilling away.
Get out of town.
No
Novocaine?
No Novocaine.
Oh my word.
I mean, and I was in first grade, so I would have been around 6. And the fear to me wasn't just the pain. It was the fact that my parents didn't know about this. I didn't know if this guy was practicing. He looked pretty young. He was like practicing dental school. And so they would choose like Christian kids to do these kind of things because they're second-class citizens in another way. So, you know, I don't think it's that extreme here, but it's kind of getting there. For example, Australia, I just saw a video where a father was not willing to hand over his child, and, you know, they had to tackle him down, and, you know, those kind of subtle things. And then other things like the choir teacher, for example, for music class would put you out right in front of the piano while the whole class is sitting there in an auditorium and be like, you know, he's not singing this song with us because he is they call it Stunde, which is like a rebel. And as a 6-year-old, you're standing there, you're like, I have no idea why they're doing this, but my mom told me it's going to happen. So they're kind of subtle things that happen to us, but on the other hand, that's where we're starting off right now.
It is, and it's fascinating that you guys are here and remember. And I was telling, I think we were talking about this the other day, I honestly think this is part of the reason why you're here right now. To sound the alarm, to say, hey, this has happened in other places before. You have a similar, how far apart are you guys in age?
So I'm just 32, just turned today.
Yeah.
Oh, it's your birthday, Dmitry. Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Woo! Wish I'd sing with you, but not right now.
Yeah, so I'm 39, going to be turning 40 pretty soon.
And so how old were you when you came here?
Our family came here in 89, like right when everything broke down.
Yeah.
So yeah, the state was trying to keep things together, but we kind of knew something was going down because of just the way that Gorbachev spoke.
God for Reagan, for President Reagan.
Yeah,
it was for that courage that he displayed.
Yeah, everything that happened, from what I hear, you can probably attest to this more, but what happened afterwards was kind of hectic because everything got privatized, and that's a whole different story.
When did you come over?
So we came here in 97.
Oh wow! So you were there a little bit longer.
Yeah.
And you said it was your grandparents who really had experienced the imprisonment and the beatings and all that. Take us from there. Then what happened?
Well, I think my parents, their experience, because they kind of didn't get the really horrible things that happened to them. They more of the things that they experienced is, you know, just ridiculing for them being Christians and just making fun of them in school and things like that. And that's something that they experienced. You know, my grandfather, when he so this is my grandfather. When he was essentially a younger gentleman, he had to flee his country because he became a Christian as well, and he had to essentially go in front of this committee, and they had to review his status. Now, why? Essentially, they called him. You know, why would you become a Christian? You know, you're an idiot. Essentially, that's what they called him, and he had to essentially tell him, you know, if you think I'm an idiot, then let me go. I'm gonna leave this place. I'm gonna leave this job, and I'm gonna run away. And they ended up going to a different country because they felt they were not safe anymore. So they picked up and they left, and my dad was born in a Middle Eastern country because they moved there. And it was that kind of lifestyle was always something going on, always something that's behind them that they had to kind of fear. So that was kind of the unfortunate thing. And what kind of talking about some parallels here to kind of add to Yaroslav's story, you know, what we see now is, again, things that are happening without parents' consent.
Yeah.
I think especially when we think about it, like abortion, right? There's some, you know, you can be, sometimes your parents might not even know that your kid had an abortion, or the transgender whole conversion, right? It's those little things are starting to happen, and eventually it's going to get worse and worse. And we have to stop it now, and otherwise, next thing we know, it's going to be anything. The state is going to control everything.
It's true, and I think as parents, I have 7 children, and I cannot even conceive. My oldest daughter's 30. I cannot conceive of what is happening with my youngest daughter, who's 10. In the time in this 20-year span, we have seen education flip on its head. But the truth is, the more we're uncovering, this is the way it's been going for a long time. They've just been very quiet about it. Now they're not quiet anymore. And so we see these direct assaults on the family, trying to separate parents from their children ideologically, trying to do it spiritually. There's lots of different ways to do it. I was writing down a couple things as you guys are talking, and one of the things I wrote down was that here in the United States, the founding fathers in this nation came up with an amazing idea that nobody else had tried, and they said our rights don't come from government, our rights come from God. This is why freedom of religion is so vitally important here in the United States, because when we get rid of that, you bring in socialism, and they're going to try to do everything they can to stamp it out. This is why you see they're removing the 10 Commandments. If you go down into downtown Portland, they've knocked down all the Christian statues trying to erase our history. This is that philosophy of Karl Marx, right, that we're actually seeing now being played out in the public square. And I thought the other thing that you said that was so telling was how the Christians were really seen as a thorn in the side of these bureaucrats, of the elites, I guess is what you would call them. And this is how we're being viewed now in the United States. Those of us who want freedom and are standing up against mask mandates and standing up against the mandated injection and all of this stuff, they are conditioning this generation to view their freedom as selfish. And that's very dangerous, and it's where we're going. What are some other, as you guys think about what you're watching and seeing in the news, the obvious assault on parental rights, kind of a no-brainer. Is there anything else that you're watching and you're going, man, handwriting's on the wall, we've seen this before?
I think just education alone is such a huge attack on education, and just that aspect. And one thing that I'm thinking, when obviously a lot of people are pulling their kids out of schools. I work for Freedom Foundation, and like I mentioned, there's so many people are opting out. The teachers are opting out of unions, because that's oftentimes what's causing a lot of this. And one thing that I'm constantly kind of keep thinking is, the parents that do take their kids out of school, they can't just sit back and just think that that's going to be the end of it. They can take their kids out, and they don't have to do anything about it. I feel like once enough people get their kids out of schools, they're gonna go after homeschools, and we can't just sit there and let them take that, because that's gonna be, I don't know, after homeschooling, there's nothing left.
Well, there isn't, and I think I always encourage parents, when you take your children out of the public school, don't take yourself out of the public school system. We continue. My kids have never attended the public school in this area, because Jay and I saw the handwriting on the wall 23 years ago. But we have been very involved in actively helping the parents whose kids are still in the public school to wake up, to know what's happening, to realize, listen, this is it's like a slow death, right, that we're experiencing right now, this very slow. And in the last 4 or 5 months, we're watching it pick up with incredible speed. When you came into the studio today, Dmitry, you said, have you seen what Kate Brown just did? No. She just has instituted a mask mandate outside. And I just thought, who do these people think that they are?
Right. That
the Americans are just going to continue to roll over, but that's what we've been doing.
Yep.
We basically have shown them that we'll put up with it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of frightening.
And I think I heard also today, one of my coworkers mentioned, we have Delta variant now, and I think there's talks about some other variant now.
Well, I'm sure the Lambda is coming out, and the Alpha Chi Beta, that's got to come out.
It's never going to end.
It never will. No, and fear is a really good way to control people. That was another question I guess I had for the two of you. Did you see the communists use fear to control people as you were growing up? Or did you hear about it?
Well, so that's a good question, which I think we definitely need to get to. But going back, you imagine a whole country, because the Russia in general, the Slavic people, super religious people. Like 90-something% was Orthodox in Russia before communism even started. So they didn't convert to like a socialist communist regime overnight. There was a revolution that came along, but it doesn't matter. You know, you have people in power, but it doesn't mean that the whole country is going to convert automatically. So how did they pull out religion, or how did they even set these people aside and make them look like they're just crazy? It actually started with schooling. They did it. They did a separation of church and state. I'm pretty sure it was a much quicker approach to church and state. They just said, okay, you can't teach any religion in school at all. You have to take any kind of religious symbology, which in Orthodox, in Russian Orthodox,
Kind of a big
that
deal.
stuff is all over the place. I mean, they have little icon, you know, little Mary or Jesus all over the place. You go into any house, they'll have it there. So how were they able to, you know, do that within a very short period of time? They hit education. That was number one. So once they were able to get one generation away from viewing or even hearing about God or even any kind of religion, doesn't matter if they were people that were Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, whatever was in that region, because the Soviet bloc was so diverse. You have a lot of the Asia down south, like Kazakhstan, even Afghanistan. Like, how were they able to get people to do this? And it's all about education. If they were able to get the kids away from the parents, become the parent to the kids in a way, or kind of usurp the parents' authority. Yes. So one of the things is they prevented kids from like going to church meetings. So they said, hey, you older people go. This is kind of like almost a Pharaoh thing.
It is.
It's like, yeah, you know, you parents can do whatever you need to do. You're going to probably disappear within 20 years because a lot of the people were older, but don't take the kids with you. And that was a huge thing. Then what happened was the state actually got into the church, and that was really scary. Like they would send, they would have like KGB agents become members, and then they would eventually take over the church building. And
so the parishioners didn't know, or did they didn't know there was a KGB in the church?
Some of them actually knew, but at that point, there's a really interesting documentary. It's not in English, it's in Russian, but they took 100 young people, like youth leaders, for example, and they spread them out all across Russia. They allowed them to gather. They gave them buildings, which was a big thing because they took away personal property.
That's Communism 101.
There was one guy out of this group that said no, and eventually he was. The whole thing is about his story, but eventually it turned out that all those churches that were actually run by the state, quote quote, no longer exist. So that whole issue worked itself out on a spiritual level, if you want to go that route. So education was the first thing that they attacked. And you can even go and watch the trial, the tribunals, kind of what Dmitry was referring to. You know, on my level, it was just standing in front of class and the teacher pointing towards this person and saying, you know, you believe in God, ha ha ha, and would throw a couple pointers why God doesn't exist. Parents would have the same thing, but with some kind of a conclusion, like, you know, you're going to jail or something like that. So it always ended in some kind of a punishment. Like, for example, towards education, since people are listening to this and like want to hear more about schooling and stuff. Christian people were fairly smart. I can't say that it was just uneducated people. There were some educated people, and a lot of them went to school. They got great grades. It was called a red diploma. That means you got all A's through high school.
Wow.
A lot of these people, they wouldn't give them the red diplomas because they'd be acknowledging that a Christian who believes in God
was smart.
And they made them look kind of like it wouldn't work with the system, because how can a Christian have a red diploma? So, and then that translated into work and jobs. So Christians, if they found out that you're a great doctor and you can perform surgeries that nobody else can. But if you're a Christian, you're going in the basement type of thing. You're not going to hold that position. And I think communism partially didn't fall, but it lost so much labor force just because of that. Like Bill Krasnogorov's dad, he was a great fabricator. He worked with like metal and machinery. And what they would do is, to get him out of his position, they would give him the lowest common denominator job possible at the facility that he was working out. Plus, since they had to meet quotas, they would give him impossible tasks to do. Like, if a normal person, he would like make like, 5 tractors or something per day, for example, right? They would tell him you have to do 10. So, but the thing is, these people they were led by God. He would invent stuff just to keep up with the quotas. And these testimonies, they're just left and right. And I think to him it happened like twice. It went up to like 20 units or something like that, when a normal person could do like 5 or something. And it was just amazing. He was telling me this story about his dad. I was like, wow. So people literally had to survive. Another thing, as Dmitry mentioned, people had to move. Like if it became unbearable, and the shunning became to the point where you couldn't do anything, you had to move. Like, for example, my mother, she's Russian. So I was born in Moscow. People are like, oh, Moscow. But I was only born there. My mom, she's Ukrainian, but she was born in like Almaty, which I think is Kazakhstan. My dad was Russian, but he grew up in Baku. So people were displaced left and right. That's one of the things that they did, is they tried to move people around, especially if there was Christians. They would move them around so they would have no contact with anybody. Kind of like what we're having here today. I mean, people are just moving to any state possible that doesn't have any kind of persecution.
And the message has got to be, we have to establish a beachhead here, because we're watching people, and I'm seeing it every single day. They're moving from Washington and Oregon. They're going to Texas. They're going to Florida. They're going to Montana. They're going to any place but here. What they don't realize is, even though, I've met Governor DeSantis, he's a wonderful human being. He's the wonderful governor of Florida. Most people don't know that he won that election by a razor-thin margin against a completely insane woman. And it could have very easily swung the other direction. So let's say that we let them drive us from our homes because we're just sick of Kate Brown and Governor Inslee, because who ain't sick of those guys, right? They're criminals. Who's not sick of this? It's ridiculous. So let's say that we all just go, forget it. We're gonna go to Florida. Now we've left our home, we've left our roots, we've left this beautiful area that we love, and we move to Florida, and Florida has a bad election, and now Florida becomes Washington State, and we've left our homes. And we're very, very close, and I want people to hear that, because I have the privilege, my husband and myself, of traveling all over this nation. And I'm telling you, everywhere I go, we see it more here, because it's like a cancer in the country, right? So if stage 4 is the end, Washington State's at a stage 3, Texas may be at a 2, Florida might be at a 1, but the cancer is still there. And so for us to pretend like it isn't is foolishness. And you're saying, both of you, and we've talked about this before, but the education is ground zero for this stuff. And I've had people ask me, talk about something else. Why are you talking about, in your congressional, and why are you focusing so much on education? And I'm like, we should be so laser focused on our education system right now to understand that we are cranking out these kids by the hundreds of thousands every single year in this country, and they wouldn't think twice about throwing you in jail, Dmitry, for your crazy conservative viewpoint. They think you're dangerous. And they have been indoctrinated. They really do believe that. And this is where we have opportunity to sound the alarm, to do what your courageous wife did, and pull your children out of these schools, because that we are losing. And I think really the Slavic community was hard to come around to this, because I've spoken, long before you and I were friends, Dmitry, I was going to the Slavic community in Sacramento, and going to to Word of Truth in Battleground. And people were like, oh, I don't know, English isn't our first language. This is a huge problem, right? English isn't our first language. And I was saying, your kids are they're going to turn your kids against you. And you can only say it so many times. But I don't see the resistance as much now. And your community is special in that they do know communism. they do understand socialism. This generation, these Americans, these lazy, uneducated Americans, really, I can say that. You can't say that about me, but I can say it about me, right? So the lazy, uneducated Americans, they don't know. They really don't. And you can say, well, it's on you, but they're a product, most of these young adults, of the public school system.
Yeah, the thing is, you're so hard on the American people.
Well, that's because I am one. See, I can talk really bad about my sisters, but you can't.
Yeah, so
right? That's how we are.
Like, we feel guilty as a Slavic community, and I can maybe say this personally for myself. I don't know about Dmitry, but that we've been here for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, I started voting about 2 years ago when the organization started.
Mm-hmm.
So what was I doing for the 30 years? And I think what happened was the Slavic community came here to America, and they just
took a deep breath and took a nap. That's
very, very long nap.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 30-year nap, pretty much.
Like a Rip Van Winkle kind of a nap.
And the reason for that is because they were Americans that we knew. We're like, wow, they've been doing this for 200 years. They would know if something came up and it was wrong or it was going towards a specific ideology. They would catch that. But I think I can't really blame the American people that much, because it's almost like this. I went to Mexico once, not like on the resort vacation, but it was more like
like Tijuana.
Like Rosarita, and then Tijuana. We went there, and some other small town.
More like on mission work.
Yeah, but for me, didn't really do a lot of talking. It was just more like scoping things out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what I realized is like these people have a beautiful country.
Yes, they do.
I mean, like, it's a resort. It's warm. The climate is just perfect. There's land. There's everything. Why are they not thriving?
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized is, with the technology that we have today, you have YouTube, you have internet, TV, but I think until a person goes to a different country and sees how it is at that different country, he really has nothing to compare to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is maybe what happened to the American community. I know immigration is a huge driver for people to be like, hey, what's happening? We just came out of a communist country. We swam over here from Cuba.
Yeah.
They're kind of still in shell shock. But it was good. In '89, it was like heaven compared to what's happening right now. But what I'm saying is, it's a perspective thing, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I would love for these college kids, the ones that we're talking about, that have been kind of brainwashed.
Go to Venezuela. Yeah, go to Cuba.
I mean, it doesn't even have to. Take them to China and have them say something wrong about the government. They're going to be out of there.
You know what's so interesting, though? These kids are so brainwashed. There was a gentleman I just spoken on Alaska, Washington, the other day, trying to help parents take their kids out of the schools. And I went to a school board meeting, and I was speaking up very strongly against critical race theory, which is just teaching our children to be racist, right? So we're teaching this terrible ideology. Well, at the end, one of the young people from the back of the room came up. I think he was a Washington State University, a graduate maybe. And he said, I spent 2 years in communist China. And I was thinking, good, he's gonna tell everybody. But then he said, you know what I learned? He looked right at me. He said, the communist dictatorship, the president of China, Xi Jinping, these are wicked people in many, many respects. The oligarchs that are there, the elites get all the money, and the people are suffering. And he acknowledged that. I lived in China, and I saw it. He said the worst part about it was that the Chinese government tells you what you can and cannot listen to, what you can and cannot say, what will and will not be taught. And he said, you want to bring that here. Because I didn't want critical race theory taught in the school. And I wanted to, there wasn't a debate. So you couldn't stand up and say anything. But I wanted to stand on my feet and say, you foolish, foolish child, that you cannot see the difference between teaching things that are harmful. I mean, you want to teach someone about critical race theory, fine, but we're not doing that. We're teaching them that critical race theory is correct. There's a difference. And so we're not saying censorship. If we were saying censorship, then we would say, no, we don't want to talk about communism, but we're not doing that. We're saying teach it from the right perspective, and that's not what we're doing. But this liberal university students' takeaway from China was it would be wrong for me, someone like me, to come into a school and say, no, you can't teach critical race theory because that's communist. It's really messed up. It's really, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, I mean, you're right, I am hard on the Americans, because I grew up here, and I'm just like, I've been William Wallacing all over the country for many, many years. So I'm starting to be like, this is like the worst. Normally when you say, I told you that was going to happen, you can kind of gloat a little bit. There's no satisfaction in this. This is sorrowful what's happening to our country, and we're watching it happen right in front of us. And I guess my anger, if you will, at the education system and my frustration with the young people, you're completely right. They don't know different. They've literally been taught that this country is a terrible place, that we're an oppressive country, that we're not the beacon of hope that we have been historically around the world.
But people still died to get here,
It's
like we're
true.
seeing right now from Afghanistan. I mean,
Yes.
it's
Well, and this is a shameful moment for the United States. It's an embarrassing moment as we're leaving our allies, people who have risked their lives to help us, and we're leaving them there. What in the world is going on? And we're watching so many of these young people and kids who have grown up in the public school system. This is why I keep telling parents, take your children out of these schools. Do not leave them in there for one more second, because this indoctrination that you were referring to is in everything. It literally is in every subject. It's not like they don't pick the indoctrination book off the shelf and say, kids, for the next hour I'm going to indoctrinate you. No, it's literally woven into math and science and history and language and reading and art. It's in all of it. And so it's a poisoned well. So you can no longer drink water from a poisoned well. And it's fascinating to me to talk to you. And I wish that your message and what your families came from and what you saw and what you witnessed firsthand. And thank God for your parents passing down the stories to you.
Yeah.
So that you will remember them, because you don't get it in school. I mean, you said that yourself, right?
Yeah.
You didn't get that
No.
in school.
Exactly.
Yeah. So where do we go from here, guys? Because I guess my question is like, we can sit here and get all depressed, wah, wah, Well, not you. You're not depressed, but I am.
Right.
Well,
for me, like I'm just watching our Slavic community, and for the longest time they've been constantly saying, church and politics don't work together.
Yeah.
You leave that at the door.
That's not just the Slavic community. That's America.
True. But
Yeah.
I think Slavic community maybe even worse, because they, it has nothing to do with the church. Like, you don't bring it, you forget about it. Christians don't even belong in politics. And, for the longest time that was happening. And I think a lot of it has to do because we've seen, the worst of it. We've seen the worst of the political kind of world, right? But what I see, when I look at the Bible, every single main character in the Bible, they were heavily involved in politics. They were either elected officials, they were either leaders and kings and queens. They were essentially, almost every character had a very prominent role, and they were very influential.
They were leaders.
They were leaders, and that's why we need to become that. I think we cannot separate those two. And the more I study the Bible, the more passionate I get about it, and I just hope the Slavic community, they start realizing that, and we start actually getting more and more involved. Not only voting, and that's important. That's a great stepping stone, because the Slavic community still doesn't vote as much as we want them to. But just going to a school board, that's important. Just running for a very small position, even just getting involved, with organizations like ours, it's a place, and that's for a lot of reasons why we have this organization, is to have a place where the Slavic community can get involved. Maybe they don't want to go to the school board because it's very confusing. They can come to us, and we've been doing this for such a long time. We have an idea where is a great place, and we can navigate them. They can just get involved with us. But getting involved is really, really important. We can no longer just give up, and because the fact that people are saying voting doesn't matter anymore, that's already a very losing position. And if you think voting is not important, you already lost.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And you guys have, you're showing, I think, a lot of people that there are uncomfortable moments. Like your wife pulling your kids out of school is a scary thing to do. Going to a school board meeting when you've never done it before is intimidating, right? And so I think we're gonna have to be willing to get uncomfortable. We have to be willing to say, okay, I'm gonna do this thing. I told my husband the other day, I would really like, let's run for Congress. You guys want, I'm gonna tell you what, I do things that scare me every day now, right? Whether it's national interviews or whatever it is, speaking in front of new audiences all the time, whatever that is. But I think the country's worth fighting for. And that's where we are. We're going to have to kind of launch into warrior mode. In this warrior mentality, we fight first for our children, but ultimately we're fighting for our freedom. And in some respects, I have sensed for some time we're sort of gasping for air. And when you see Kate Brown feels so comfortable in her totalitarianism, in the way that she's, basically trying to take the freedoms of ordinary Oregonians away from them, that should be a wake-up call. And I think, Dmitry, maybe it was you earlier that said, we think this is going to wake people up, right? Because it could have been, we could have gone back to business as usual and people would have forgotten that there were wicked people who want to rule the people of this country with an iron fist. We maybe would have forgotten. I don't think we're going to forget Kate Brown anytime soon. I don't think we're going to forget Governor Inslee.
Well, I think they're relying of erasing the history. I think they're relying, if they can get more and more of this, they can just erase all the bad things that they've done, and they can just continue moving forward.
Mm-hmm. And you guys still think, your families came here and you're watching what's happening. How are they taking this in now?
The thing is, America is like the last stand. Though.
It is. There's no place to go.
Yeah.
I mean, the way that I look at it, I know Dmitry just went all Bible out on this here, which is it's good. But there's a quote that Richard Burke from the Western Liberty Network said, which I'm not sure how appropriate it is, but I'm just going to say it.
Shout out to Richard Burke.
Yeah, he was in the studio and he said, either you do politics or politics will do you.
Yeah.
And the reason that quote kind of stuck to me is I'm like, trying to explain this to pastors and even parents, like who still to this day are like, just drop politics. Go do something in the church, go do something in the community. That's how things are going to change. Well, I look at it from a slightly different perspective. For example, for the people that are listening to this and they're believers, the Bible talks about two main sins, right? There's the sin of commission, and there's a sin of omission. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people are like, yeah, let's focus on the ones, that, they'll drink and stuff, and people know those. But it's the one where you see something being done, and you know that it's evil, or it's infringing on somebody else's rights. Not your rights, maybe, at this point, but on somebody else's. And you don't do anything, that's on me. Mm-hmm. That's not on the person it's happening to. It's not on the person that's even doing it at this point. It's on me because I didn't stop it. Mm-hmm. And that's the perspective I think that a lot of Slavic people who are faith-based, they have to understand that as Christians. Because sooner or later, what woke us up was really actually the weirdest thing ever. It was the whole school, was it the school? Mm-hmm. The protest that happened in Libya was mainly because of something that happened in school. It affected our kids. Mm-hmm. We would have never thought 30 years ago that that's what would actually get the Russian community active. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But they care about their kids.
Yeah.
They care about their kids. We had a meeting here, I want to say it was 2.5 years ago, maybe. And I showed a video called The War on Children, and there was a huge number of Slavic families here at the Resource Center. And we showed them The War on Children. And I said, this you're not going to like this. And they're going to say words and use language that's going to be offensive, and you're going to squirm in your seat. And there were some really old, Russian grandmothers with the scarves on and everything. I was like, oh dear, this is going to be. I looked at my husband. He was like, I don't know if we should play this, because it is awful, but it is what's happening, and we have to be willing to look the awful thing in the face and not shy away from it, not run away. And I did see a lot of those grandmothers. They were turning in their seats. Some of them were crying. But they needed to see it. They needed to see this is what's happening, and it's not just the United States. It's Australia, it's Africa, it's everywhere. Yeah. Because this is the spirit of the age that we're talking about, and it's an assault against the whole world. And so what do God's people do? They need to get involved. They need to become leaders.
Well, it's interesting you speak of grandparents or grandmas. This last election, I think what really inspired me, I've seen probably some interesting pictures. Like some grandmas are coming out and like, first of all, being big Trump supporters. That was just surprising to me. But they were probably more educated about politics and Trump and just the entire thing than some of our younger people, because they live through it and they can see it. And I know my grandma, she was super passionate about what was going on, and she probably again knows more politics and what's going on than some of the younger people. That's crazy.
It is, yeah, and they know how important it is to protect it.
Yeah, and that video that you were talking about, I don't know if it's the same one. We went to the Old Believers community in Woodburn, and they showed the same thing, and there was people there a lot older, and then
it's uncomfortable.
It was an eye opener, because they're saying this is happening in the school. This is what your kids are seeing. If you feel uncomfortable watching this, how do they feel? Yeah, and they just shocked them like bombshell.
Well, and honestly, that is what needs to happen. And I think that the saddest part here is what really breaks my heart. And I said this to the families that were here that night. What breaks my heart is our kids are not shocked by this, because they've been indoctrinated. They're not shocked by it. They're not shocked by pictures the pictures that we showed or the terminology that we use. We are, because our hearts are still tender toward God's gift of human sexuality. It's a precious gift. These kids, their hearts are seared toward it. And that's because from the time they're very little, this terminology is in the schools. And so by the time they start reading these books to the kids, they already know that stuff. They're like, what do you know, Mom and Dad, what do you care? Well, the mom and dad and the grandparents see it, and their response is, oh my God, what have we done? We've left our kids in this system, and by the time we take them out, they have a completely upside down view from the one that we wanted them to have, of how precious this gift is and why we want to protect it. And so when and for me, even taking, several years ago when we started taking busloads of people up to Olympia and testifying, and I remember standing on the floor of the State House in Olympia and testifying, and Chris Reichdahl sitting behind me. And this guy is just really a puppet of Governor Inslee, does whatever Inslee wants him to do. And I was literally begging the board, listen to me. This is so important. Well, I've gone from saying it's a crisis to saying it's an emergency now. Now it's an emergency. Our country's on fire. Our state is on fire. Our schools are on fire. I do not think that the schools can be corrected. I think the whole system's going to have to come down, and we're going to have to build it back again. Right. And that's going to take a long time. So in the meantime, we have an opportunity, and isn't it just like God to bring us solutions before we know we have problems?
Yep.
And there are so many good solutions right here in Vancouver and all around the country for homeschooling. There's so many, 25 years ago, when we pulled our daughter out, I was like, okay, well, I guess we're doing this thing, but I didn't feel like the school is necessarily on fire. I just thought there's got to be a better way. I really considered myself part of the tail end of the homeschool pioneers. These people are not pioneers, they're refugees. They're not running to something, they're running from something. And so we need to and when you see someone running from something, what do? You give them help. You say, can I help you? I see that you're running running from the burning house or running from whatever it is. And what do? We come alongside with food and water and shelter. And that is the job of the church right now, to come alongside these people who are running from a system that is stealing their children from them, and say, how can we help you?
Right.
And I feel like if the church can get that, if we can get it, dug down deep, and the church will start talking about that and coming up with solutions and partnering with people like my husband and myself who have started this place, there are solutions. Yeah. There really are. It will take courage.
And the good news, there is pastors are waking up. At least I know a few pastors who have been very outspoken, to the point where they say, if you don't vote, if you're going to throw away this ballot, you're essentially committing a sin. So I love seeing that. I know it's kind of might sound a little radical, but it's kind of to Yadik's point. And we're having a pastor come on this Thursday on our radio program, where we're going to talk about those things. We're going to talk about church and politics, and I hope people are going to listen to that and hear how important for us to get away from the idea that church and politics doesn't work. It does work, and if we want to be influential, we have to get involved.
That's so true.
So I'm looking forward to that.
Good. How can people find you guys at Slavic Vote?
So we have multiple ways. Thank you for that. I think the best way is Instagram. I think that's kind of our sweet spot, where we have a lot of.
Are you guys millennials? Listen to that. The best way is Instagram. Oh, okay.
I had to get Instagram because of Slavic Vote. That's how old I am.
And I haven't used it for
You're
that long.
talking to a woman in her 50s, but carry on.
I haven't used it for that long, but I know that it's very, the youth use it, and we
Yeah, they do.
want to
Absolutely. I'm just giving you a hard
Yep.
time. Don't listen to me on this.
But Instagram is probably, the best way because there's a lot of pictures, we love pictures. There's a lot of videos. There's just a lot of content. You can essentially see what we do. And then our website, if that's another place where you can find a lot of our resources, because during the election, and for those people who might not know who we are, what we do is also we put out election material, and something that we do, we try to study these candidates. And recently we've been actually partnering with the SV Action, which Lily now leads. We've been able to almost endorse candidates, which is very makes things a lot easier. So that's been very helpful this last election. So our website, slavicvote.org, Instagram Slavic Vote, Facebook Slavic Vote,
And people,
PNW.
if there were a pastor to invite you to come to their church, are you available to do those kinds of things?
Oh yeah, we've been probably visited over 50, 60 churches just in the last 2 years, and in the Slavic churches, sometimes twice, and we've brought this message. And my message now is, first of all, the local election is probably where we really have to focus on. I know everybody's been focusing on the Trump and
That's what
his
I've
election.
been saying. Yeah, this 2021 election is crucial.
Yep, exactly. So the local election is going to be super important. Maybe the general election, maybe the national elections are rigged, but we have to really focus on the local elections, because one thing that I like to say, and maybe you can correct me, I think I've heard, half our country is Christian, right? For the most part. Half of that number is only registered to vote, and half of that number is only voting. So imagine if at least half of the Christians were actually voting, this would not be happening.
No, it wouldn't be happening. And I think now, we're learning a very painful lesson.
Yeah.
There are a lot of Christians who thought, for whatever reason, they didn't like, President Trump's style, and so they just thought, you know what, forget it, we're going to go with this guy. And we're learning a very hard lesson. We're 7 months now into a 4-year term.
Yeah.
And he's done more damage to our country in 7 months than I think any president before him in the history of the world.
Absolutely.
And this is on us. This is on the voters in the United States. Clearly there was voter fraud, and we're going to have to root it out and fix it, and fix the election system in this nation and here in the Northwest. But the bottom line is, they would have had a much harder time getting away with it if the church hadn't just turned their nose and said, no, this is, we're too good for this, and washed their hands of it. Yeah. And we need to never let this happen again. It can never happen again.
Absolutely. And I know we're about to end here, but one thing that I kind of want to say, like you said, we're here for this reason. I really do believe God has brought us to this country for this reason. And our voice, the Slavic community voice, is very, very powerful, because unfortunately the white people in this country, the Americans, they don't have much of a voice anymore. The Slavic community, as an immigrant, as a refugee, we still have some kind of voice. We have that card, right? Yeah. And if we can use that, I think it'll first of all, we can speak against these things that we're talked about today, and hopefully we can start turning things around. So using that voice is important, and if we don't use it, it's going to be unfortunate.
Well, and silence is consent.
Yep.
At this point, when all they need to continue and to finish the job they've started is for us to be quiet. Absolutely. And I appreciate you guys and your willingness to come on and to be a voice. Dmitry, Yaroslav, thank you for coming. Now, I didn't even try your last name because I can barely do the first name, but just for fun, Dmitry, what's your last name?
So
say it slow for the ladies in the back.
So the English version is Sashenko,
yeah.
Sashenko, and then the Russian is Sashchenko.
That's beautiful. What's your last name?
Mine is simple. It's Borisov.
Borisov?
Or
Borisov. It's the only thing that rhymes with my first name, Yaroslav Borisov.
Well, he didn't say the Russian one. It would be Borisov would be the Russian version.
I love it. Well,
and I know you say you have a lot of Slavic followers. So, and I hope we can speak to them right now and say, if you live, there's a lot of places like Ohio and New York and Florida, and a lot of times they haven't seen what we've seen here in Portland, and it's coming. It's coming. So get active, reach out to us. We'll be happy to give you resources, connect you, and guide you through this process. And you can at least get ahead of this before it comes to you. And we're here to essentially help everybody, Slavic community, everybody else, to get out and vote. I think that's going to be the most important thing. And your election is going to be super important. We're excited about that. I think that's going to be a big churn. And I think your voice in Congress is going to be wrecking ball. That's what I'm looking forward to. Thank you.
I'm
By the
looking
way,
forward to it too. Put me in a room with Nancy Pelosi. That woman's going down.
yes, I'm looking forward to that day when you go head to head against Nancy.
Me too.
It's gonna be a beautiful day.
Yeah.
By the way, thank you for coming to our radio last week.
You're
It was a
welcome.
great program. By the way, if you are listening and you want to hear that radio, you can also find that on our Instagram and our YouTube page, which is just Slavic Vote.
That's wonderful. You guys, thank you so much for coming. It's really been a joy and an honor to have you here. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it.
You guys want more information on Slavic Vote? I will link back to all things Slavic Vote in the show notes today. We appreciate you guys listening. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you back here on Monday at the intersection of faith and culture.